Hello students. So today's lecture we are going to be discussing about weirs, which are basically flow measurement devices in open channels. Okay, so let's quickly get into an overview about weirs. So weirs essentially is an obstruction in the channel of some height. Okay, so weir is an obstruction that is constructed across the channel of some height. Now what this obstruction does is that it ensures that the water flows over the weir. Okay, so what happens is that when there's an obstruction, the water will build up and then it will flow over the weir, right? So the presence of the weir, what it does is it backs up water. Presence of weir backs water up to some height h above the weir. Okay, so let's just quickly take a look at a figure that might explain this a little bit better. Okay, so assume that I have a channel over here and then I have an obstruction. So this dashed portion that you see is an obstruction to the flow, right? So if I obstruct the flow like this, what happens? In order to continue flowing, the water builds up to some height above the behind the weir to a height, some height capital H. So in this diagram it says small h, but we are going to use capital H, and then it flows over the weir, right? So whatever I explained here is simply, this is what it is. Assume that I have an obstruction across the entire width of the channel, okay, of some height. Okay, what will happen in order for the flow to continue happening, the only way it can happen is for the water to build up to some height and then flow over the weir, right? So that's what happens. So that's a simple definition of, or simple understanding of how a weir works. Now, generally speaking, I can say that the flow rate is proportional to this height to which the water builds up. If the flow rate is high, the water will build up to a greater height. If the flow rate is low, the water will build up to a lesser height, right? This is fairly obvious. So I want you to think about this, maybe come up with your own reasons why you think this might be true, right? We'll anyway prove this a little bit later using, using Bernoulli a little later in this class. Okay. So generally speaking, this Q is proportional to H, right? So if I can somehow find a relationship between Q and H for a weir, then all I need to do is I construct a weir, okay, and then I just go behind the weir at some distance and measure the flow depth above the weir's height, right? Once I measure that flow height, I can use that expression for Q, put that value of H into that expression and estimate what the flow rate could be, right? So that's the purpose behind, uh, this analysis. Why we are trying to do this is to find out some relationship between Q, the flow rate, and H, which is the height of the water above the weir, and see if we can come up with some relationship which we can use in practical situations. Okay, so the primary role of the weir is essentially to store water, right? So imagine if the flow rate is very low, the water will not flow over the weir, right? It will just get stored up to this height. Whereas if you didn't have a weir, it will just all flow away. But if I construct some obstruction like this, it will keep the water, some minimum amount of water will always be stored. And if the flow rate is higher than that, then it will flow over the weir, right? So the primary role is to store water, but it can also, as I said, it can also measure the flow rate in the channels. It can be used as a device to measure the flow rate in the channels. Okay. So now we're going to look at a few different types of weirs, right? One example is what is called a broad crested weir, right? So here I see, this figure that you see over here is an example of a broad crested weir. So this obstruction in the flow of water has a broad crest. Crest means the top, right? So this is the obstruction. That obstruction has got a top surface which is very broad, okay, compared to this one over here. We'll talk about this also, right? So this is an example of a broad crested weir, right? You might have seen this in your in your wherever you are from. If you go around, you might notice these kinds of obstructions in the in the streams or rivers that you have in your village or your city or your town. Typically, it's more common to see this in villages, but yeah, all of you might have encountered these kinds of things. Another typical type of example of a weir is what is called an ogee shaped weir. Okay, so basically this ogee shaped is essentially to make sure that the water flows along the the shape of the weir is such that it mimics the shape of the water surface, right? So instead of water flowing out like this, right, if I have an ogee shaped this shape is called an Ogi shape. Okay, I don't know why it's called Ogi shape. We can you'll have to find out why it's called Ogi. Okay, so this is an example of an Ogi shaped weir. The other type of weir is what is called a sharp crested weir. Sharp crested. So that's what you see over here. This figure that I had shown, the earlier figure, is a sharp crested weir. So you can clearly see why it's called a sharp crested weir. The top of the weir, right, which is the crest. Crest means the top. The top of the weir is a sharp surface, right? So there's a very sharp interface between the fluid and this weir material. Okay, so there's a sharp interface there. So that's why it's called a sharp crested weir. In the sharp crested weir, there are many different types. Okay, you can have different shapes. You can have a triangular shape. This is called, sometimes it's called a V notch because it resembles the shape V. Okay, or it can be a rectangular shape or a trapezoidal shape and so on. So when this shape I'm talking about is in the plane perpendicular to this to the screen. Okay, in the screen what you see is a longitudinal view of the flow. So if I was looking at the flow from this right hand side towards the left, okay, I would see the shape of the weir, and the shape of the weir can be anything. It can be a rectangular shape, it could be a trapezoidal shape, it could be a V notch or a triangular shape, or it could be a compound shape. So all of these different shapes are possible in the weirs. Okay, so we are going to focus essentially on sharp crested weirs and broad crested weirs. Okay, those are the only two we are going to look at this semester. Okay, so let us quickly get into it. So let us say I have a sharp crested weir of some height, capital P. Okay, so imagine this. I have uh, an open channel in which I'm constructing an obstruction to the flow of some height, capital P. Okay, so and as you can see, it's a sharp crested weir because this top of this weir is sharp. Okay, let us say the water backs up to a height, capital H, behind the weir. So you can see that over here, right? So this is the height, capital P. Behind the weir, the water is backing up to a height of capital H behind, right? So this capital H is happening. So now I'm going to define a few terms here. Very important terminology we are going to define. This water that flows over the weir. So this shape that you see, right? The water that's flowing over here. This is called the nappe. N-A-P-P-E, nappe. Okay. So that's the nappe. Then, as you can see, the water surface, if you go a certain distance behind the weir, the height of the water surface is capital H above the weir, right? But as I approach the weir, the water surface gently curves, and by the time I reach the weir, the water surface has dropped a little bit, right? It's not capital H over here. At the top of the weir, the water surface is not at a height of capital H. It is slightly less than capital H. So that decrease is called drawdown. Okay, so that decrease in the height of the water surface as it approaches the weir, and right at the weir, it's less than capital H. So that decrease is called drawdown. Okay, so these terminologies we'll be using a little bit later. So just keep these in mind. So I have the drawdown and I have the nappe. And another important feature is that this nappe is flowing over the weir like a jet of water, right? So therefore there is ventilation behind the nappe. When I say ventilation, what does that mean? That this nappe has atmospheric pressure on all sides, right? On this side, there's atmospheric pressure. On the bottom of the nappe also there's atmospheric pressure because this is ventilated, right? It's so you can imagine if this height was very small, right? Let me try to draw that. Okay, if this height was very small, okay, assume it's a straight line, then the water may just flow down like this. It may just stick to the surface and flow down, right? If that happens, then there's no ventilation. Okay, although I've drawn it as if it's, so the water will just stick to the weir as it flows down. That will only happen if this height, capital H, is very small, right? You can imagine that. But if this height is significant, then you will see that, there is ventilation behind the nappe. Okay, so these points are very important when it comes to the derivation. So we'll keep this in mind as we move along. Okay, so these three terminologies, please remember this. As the water flows over the weir, that the portion that flows over is called the nappe. Okay, and the decline in water surface as the water passes over the weir, that's called drawdown. And the other terminology that I'm introducing here is that this nappe has got atmospheric pressure on all sides. In other words, the nappe is basically ventilated. Okay, So let's keep moving with the derivation. Okay, so we have this sharp crested weir of height capital P, and water is backing up to a height of capital H. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply Bernoulli between sections 1 and 2. Okay, I'm going to pick section 1 over here, some considerable distance behind the weir, and section 2 will be right at the location of the weir. Okay, I'm going to apply Bernoulli between sections 1 and 2. What is the total head at section 1? It will be capital P plus capital H plus V square by 2G, right? Okay, so and then at section 2, I'm going to consider a point which is at a distance of, which is at a depth of small h from the water surface, right? This, I'm going to apply Bernoulli at this point, which is at a height of small h from this water surface. Okay, so I'm going to apply Bernoulli between points 1 and 2, section 1 and section 2. So at section 1, I have capital P plus capital H plus V1 square by 2G equal to, at section 2, it will be capital P plus capital H minus small h, so that is the elevation at this point, plus V2 square by 2G, right? So now, what is the assumption that has gone into this equation? Right, the simple assumption that has gone in here is that this point at cross section 2 is at atmospheric pressure. Okay, why is that? The only reason we are able to assume this is because the nap is ventilated, right? If this water was not flowing out as a free jet, right, if it was clinging to the weir, then you won't have atmospheric pressure on both sides. Right now, if I take any point in this jet, okay, if I consider a point in this jet, right, let's consider a point over here, right, the pressure at this point is atmospheric, the pressure at this point is also atmospheric. So naturally, the pressure at this point in this free falling jet will also be atmospheric, right? Because it has atmospheric pressure on all sides, right? So this is something straightforward. So similarly, at this point, because the water has just started to fall freely under the influence of gravity, I'm assuming that the pressure at this point in this section is atmospheric. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. So now clearly I can eliminate some terms here. I rearrange this and I get something that looks like this. V2 equal to under root 2GH plus V1 square, right? So I've just cancelled out P and H, capital P and capital H. I'm left with small h. I take it to the other side. I get this V2 equal to under root 2GH plus V1 square. Now this I'm going to approximate it as V2 is approximately equal to under root 2GH, right? Why is that? So the assumption here is that V1 the velocity at cross section 1 is uniform, and if, as you can imagine, it'll be it'll be much smaller than V2, right? Because V1 is passing through a much larger cross sectional area, whereas V2 is passing through a smaller cross section area. But the flow rate is not the flow rate is the same at both section 1 and section 2. The flow rate is the same, but the cross sectional area is much larger at cross section 1 compared to cross section 2. So naturally, V2 will be much larger than V1. And we are also assuming that V1 is uniform at the entire section. So we get rid of V1 square. So we are left with V2 approximately equal to under root 2GH. So at a height of small h from the water surface, the velocity is under root 2GH. Okay, so we will continue to use this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to consider that this section, the weir is a triangular weir or a V notch, right? If you recollect from the earlier slide, we had considered these different shapes. So I'm going to consider the V notch shape or the triangular shape. Okay, so the shape looks something like this. Imagine this perpendicular to the direction of flow. Okay, so the flow is coming from inside the screen outside. Okay, so the water surface will be at a height of capital H. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to consider an element of size dh at a depth of h, right? So let's consider this elemental area of thickness dh, which is at a height of h from the water surface. Okay, right? So now the flow through this element will be given by dq. dq is the flow rate through this element, which will be under root 2gh, which is the velocity at a height of h, right? We just derived this in the previous slide. Velocity into area. So the velocity here at this height h is under root 2gh multiplied by this cross-sectional area. This shaded area is, what is it? It will be this thickness dh multiplied by this length, right? What is that length? that length you can simply use geometry. So the angle of this, entire angle is theta. So this half angle will be theta by 2. So tan theta by 2 will be this distance divided, this opposite side divided by adjacent side. The adjacent side is capital H minus small h, right? So this entire width will be 2 times capital H minus small h into tan theta by 2. So that is this distance, the width of this element is 2 times capital H minus small h into tan theta by 2. And the thickness is dh. So that is the area of this elemental area, right? The area of this element is 2 times capital H minus small h into tan theta by 2 multiplied by dh. You can apply geometry and prove this for yourself. It's fairly straightforward, right? So the flow through this element is under root 2gh, which is the velocity, multiplied by the area, which is this entire big term. Now I'm interested in finding the total flow rate. So how do I find the total flow rate? I simply integrate this, this entire expression from small h ranging from 0 to capital H, right? So the total Q will be, I'm just taking out everything that is outside the integration. 2, this 2 comes out, that's as a common factor. Under root 2g comes out. Tan theta by 2 also comes out. These are all independent of small h. Then I integrate from 0 to h, capital H minus small h into under root h into dh, right? So if I implement this integration, I get the final expression Q equal to, I would strongly encourage you to just simply solve this integral. It's fairly straightforward, very, very easy, right? You will get this expression Q equal to 8 by 15 under root 2g tan theta by 2 h power, capital H power 5 by 2, right? So this is the theoretical derivation for the flow rate through this triangular weir or the V notch. Okay. So, but the actual flow will be, this is theoretical. So you have to apply some coefficient of discharge. So this is similar to our Venturi meter or our orifice meter that we've already discussed in the context of pipe flows. In the case of open channel flow, you will have some other coefficient of discharge. So typically in the case of triangular weirs or V notches, this coefficient can vary somewhere between 0.5 and 0.6. Okay. So, so that's what you would get. All right. So that is the derivation for the flow through the discharge through through a triangular weir. Now, if I change this triangular shape to a rectangular shape, the derivation will be very, very straightforward, right? So you can clearly see what you will get. You will get different expressions for this depending on the shape of this. If it's a triangular shape, you get this 8 by 15 under root 2g tan theta by 2 and all that, right? If I have a rectangular shape, I'll get something else. If I have a trapezoidal shape, you'll get some other expression, right? So I'll leave that to you. Okay. So it should be fairly straightforward. The only difference is that in the case of triangular, you will get h power 5 by 2. In the case of rectangular, you will get h power 3 by 2, right? Because in the case of triangular, this the top width of this elemental surface depends on small h. Whereas if it's a rectangle, for example, this top width is independent of small h, right? So you will get h power 3 by 2 multiplied by the width of the rectangle, right? So that's the only difference in the case of a rectangle versus triangle. The rectangle and triangular shapes are the most common uh, shapes that are usually used in the case of open channels. Okay, so these are the most common examples of weirs. Okay, so let's quickly go over the assumptions that went into this derivation. Number one, the nap is ventilated, right? This was very important. This was what allowed us to assume that the pressure at cross section 2 was atmospheric pressure. Okay, then we assumed that the drawdown is insignificant. How did we assume this? I did not mention this anywhere earlier. We assumed this because we integrated from 0 to capital H, right? But if you remember, at the weir, there is some drawdown. So this capital H actually becomes something lesser at the weir. Okay. But since we don't make the measurement at the weir, we measure capital H behind the weir at some distance. So therefore, we are assuming that this drawdown at the weir is so insignificant that we can ignore it. Okay. But that is why you have the coefficient of discharge, because whatever assumptions you're making are making an impact on your prediction. So therefore, which is okay, right? So, all right. So the drawdown is insignificant. That is another assumption. Then the velocity at section 1 is uniform. This one I mentioned earlier. So therefore, because it's uniform and the cross-sectional area is large, it's small and so it can be ignored. And then the other obvious one that we ignored is that frictional losses were not taken into account, right? We assume that the between points 1 and 2 in the flow along the channel, whatever frictional losses were happening, we have ignored those. and that is why you get a coefficient of discharge to account for these assumptions that were made. Okay, so that's as far as a sharp crested weir is concerned. Now we will get into a broad crested weir. Okay, so consider a broad crested weir of height capital P. The water is backing up to some height h behind the weir. Everything is the same as a sharp crested weir. Okay, very similar to the sharp crested weir. So now I'm going to apply Bernoulli between section 1 and 2. Okay, and I'm going to say that the flow depth at above the weir is YC. Now, if you remember your terminology, YC is critical depth. Okay, I'm saying that the flow reaches critical depth above the weir. Okay, I wanted to think about why this is the case. Okay, so let us apply Bernoulli between cross section 1 and 2. So it will be capital P plus capital H plus V1 square by 2G equal to capital P plus YC plus VC square by 2G. Right, VC square by 2G is the velocity corresponding to this critical depth YC. Okay, now I wanted to think why are we so confident in saying that this depth here will be YC, and correspondingly why this will be VC, right? So that this is okay, but why is this YC? Why is the depth here YC? I wanted to think about this, but I'm going to I'll give you a few seconds and then I'll reveal the answer. Just think about this. If you remember in our earlier lecture where we had discussed about those small bumps in the uh, uniform flow, what happens when the incoming flow is subcritical? The flow depth decreases but still remains subcritical. But if I keep increasing the size of that bump, okay, beyond a certain point, the flow depth cannot decrease further because it will hit the minimum specific energy, which is corresponding to critical depth, right? So the weir typically, so that is what is happening over here. So that small bump that I said is become so large, right? We assumed that the bump was some delta Z. Now that if the delta Z crosses over a certain threshold, it becomes such that the flow depth at this cross section has to become critical. The flow depth upstream will adjust itself to become appropriately subcritical. Okay, so that's fine. So this is that is the background for this. So if you remember from that bump in the uniform flow discussion, you will realize that if the bump size is greater than a certain amount, then the flow above that bump becomes critical. So that's what's happening over here. So here the flow depth becomes critical depth. Now, if you remember, if I assume that the channel is a wide rectangular channel, then I can simply approximate VC equal to under root GYC. Because why is this? Because Froude number equal to 1 when the flow is critical, right? So VC equal to under root GYC. If I substitute that over here, what do you get? VC square by 2G will become YC, right? So let me write that. So VC square by 2G will be equal to YC by 2, right? So you can replace this VC square by 2G with YC by 2. So YC plus YC by 2 will be 3YC by 2, right? Is that okay? So P plus H plus V1 square by 2G equal to P plus 3YC by 2, because I've replaced this VC square by 2G with YC by 2. So YC plus YC by 2 becomes 3YC by 2. Then I get rid of P on both sides. P gets cancelled out, and then I rearrange this. I get YC equal to 2H by 3. That 3YC by 2, I cross multiply on both sides. I get 2H by 3 plus V1 square by 3G. Okay, so this is very important. So I've simply rearranged. I've just YC plus VC square by 2G has become 3YC by 2. Then I cross multiply. Then I get this 2H by 3 plus V1 square by 3G. Again, the same assumption applies. V1 is very small. We'll ignore it. And then we get YC is approximately equal to 2 capital H by 3. All right. So let me erase this quickly. All right. Okay. So then I use this YC in deriving my Q. Q actual will be CD times capital B, which is the width of the stream, multiplied by square root of GYC cubed. Okay. I wanted to think about how we got this. Okay. Remember, you can simply apply critical flow. Critical flow is Q square T by Ga cubed equal to 1, right? So when you apply that and you cross multiply, you will get this expression. So I wanted to work this out. So you will get, replacing Yc with 2h by 3, you will get this expression, right? Yc cube, replace it with 2h by 3, you will get this expression, Cd into 2 by 3 under root 3, capital B under root 2g, h power 3 by 2. Okay. So that is the derivation for a broad crested weir. Okay. So these are the two simple examples of sharp crested weirs and broad crested weirs. If you want to learn more about weirs and their role in open channels, I strongly encourage you. There's lots of material available online. So in this semester, this is the extent to which we'll be able to cover it. I would strongly encourage you to look up material online. There's a lot of material available. I've given you the background and given you the basic understanding. I would I hope that all of you use the available online resources and clarify your questions and doubts. And of course, you can contact me if you want to know more about weirs. Please get in touch with me, or you can find so much stuff available on YouTube. Okay, so if you have any questions, please send them to me by email or message me as usual. We will meet on Tuesday, that is tomorrow, May 5th at 12 o'clock. All right. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Bye-bye.